This e-bike here completely changed my life, and over the past 7 days I've completely ditched my car in favour of riding this bike. And even though I work from home, I've done everything from replicating commutes to the city, going to the grocery shop and the markets, and just going about my weekly day-to-day life. So join me in this epic battle between combustion and electric to see if this assisted pedal-powered bike can improve my emissions, save me some extra money, help me reach my fitness goals and calorie targets, and overall see if this is a more practical way to get around the city. So before we get into the challenge, I just want to quickly introduce you to my bike. So the bike itself is a Marin Sausalito E1, and this is a pedal assist e-bike. And what I mean by that, there's no throttle, the motor only gives you assistance when you're pedaling. The assistance is provided up to 25 kilometers per hour because typically when you reach that point, you're either going to be on the flats or you're going to be going downhill where you really don't need that assistance. So essentially it makes the harder parts of your rides going uphill a little bit easier, and this raises your overall average speed, so you're going to get there a little bit faster and a bit fresher too. So enough of the boring stuff, let's get to the challenge. So on a Saturday morning, because we live relatively close to the city, we like to go to the farmer's market. So to make it a bit more interesting for you, I'm gonna race my wife there. I know we're not saving any emissions because she's driving as well, but this is an experiment, so let's head off and see if we can beat her.
You beat me. How long have you been here for?
I literally just got here.
So just made it to the markets, and I'm actually really surprised me and Em pretty much got here at the same time. One thing I did forget was how hilly Brisbane was, but with the assistance going up the hills I always had that, and then on the flats I was kind of cruising just above that 25 kilometer limit, but to be honest I really didn't need the assistance there. So on the screen you can change the assistance, so I had it in high the whole time, and that was really just because I wanted to cruise there, just kind of a commute, not get too hot and sweaty. So I don't think of cheating in any kind of way, it's just an alternate form of transport. But if you want a little bit more of a workout, just put it in that low assistance mode. But I think it's time to refuel, so let's go to the markets. So let's talk a little bit now about emissions, savings, and practicality as well. Let's get one thing straight to start with. I'm under no illusions that the energy used to charge this battery is mostly coming from fossil fuels. But I think it's important for each of us to do our own part in reducing our carbon footprint, especially in highly populated areas where air pollution from cars can be a bit of an issue for our health. So that's where stuff like riding a normal bike or an e-bike can come in. But for me personally, living around 10 kilometers to the city, I wanted to really cut down a lot of those short car trips. And with higher cost of living, I really wanted to find out how much I could save by riding an e-bike. So throughout this experiment, I'm going to find out just how much money I'm going to save, as well as some emissions too. So from my sources, which I'll leave in the description, I found out that the e-bike costs 10 times less per kilometer than my car. And that goes for emissions per kilometer too, it's around 10 times less as well. So throughout the experiment, I'll leave a little bit of a tally, here's where we are so far, and by the end of the week, we should find out just how much we saved. So enough of that, let's get home and I'll let you know how my first ride went. So finally made it home, and Em just beat me as I was climbing up the final hill. So again, really impressed with how fast the e-bike was. And for heading to the markets in this kind of distance of trip, I actually really preferred the e-bike. One, the main reason is you don't have to worry about parking, and two, when I was walking around the markets, it was actually really good because I had the basket on the back, so I could just chuck everything on there. But one of the main questions I wanted to answer today was the ride hard? And to be honest, it really wasn't. It was a really hot day today, so 33 degrees, and being up in Brisbane, it's pretty damn humid. And yes, I was pretty sweaty by the end of it, but I didn't feel like I'd exerted myself too much. So I actually remembered to Strava on the way home, and it was 11.5 kilometers, so 23 total. And each of those trips took around 30 minutes. So pretty good experience so far, so I'm really excited to see what the rest of the week holds for me. So nothing like a good commute to cure your Mondayitis, so I'll be riding to the heart of Fortitude Valley, which is around about 11 kilometers. So I'll just do the round trip to replicate the full commute, so that's 22 kilometers. And I'll have a chat to you guys when I get back to give you my thoughts on what it was like commuting. So finally back home after the commute. So the commute was a little bit shorter. It was 10 kilometers instead of 11. So all up it was 20 kilometers there and back. So going into the city it took 25 minutes, which I think for Em, I think by car it usually takes you how long?
About 40 minutes.
About 40 minutes, so we saved it there. And then I know by bus it takes sometimes up to an hour, which is ridiculous. So it was definitely satisfying overtaking all the cars into the city. So if you are looking to get into work a little bit quicker, maybe take an e-bike. So in terms of battery life now, I've just done over 40 kilometers and I have around 20 kilometers left. So I've been leaving it high the whole time. So I think in terms of battery life, you'd expect around 60 kilometers. But that's going to vary based on your terrain. Brisbane is pretty hilly, so I'm pretty impressed with that. So let's talk a little bit more about the commute itself. So going into Fortitude Valley, I'd say it was around 80% bike paths. So I think they've done a really good job in Brisbane of getting bike paths. That may vary depending on where you are in Australia. But for me, who's not super comfortable being on the road itself, it's good to know that there were a lot of bike paths. So I guess my main concern when it comes to commuting, will you rock up to work tired, and 2, will you be all sweaty? So I think during the peak of summer and doing around 10 to 15 Ks, you're definitely going to need to have a shower if you go to work. So if you are looking for that zero sweat experience, probably best if you're a little bit close to the city, or you could take an electric scooter, but depending on where you are in Australia, they might be legal or not. But a lot of people I saw commuting by work on the electric scooters were just in their normal work clothes already. And then the second, I wasn't really that tired. In fact, it was that perfect amount of exercise where you just feel energized to start the day. But if you are interested in commuting via e-bike, probably the best way to do it would be hire something like a Neuron or a Beam e-bike. They're just on the side of the road, you can hire them using the app, and then that will give you a good indication if you like it or not. But for me personally, I'm really enjoying it so far. And then another thing, just in terms of general lifestyle, on the way home, I was able to pick up some milk and muesli as well. So that's just gonna make those small trips a little bit easier too. So that's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow, and we might do a bit of a bike check. Dealing with mini tsunamis. So it's a beautiful day today, and now that I've got a few rides under my belt, I thought I'd give you a bit of a bike check and a bit of a mini review on the bike so far. So the bike itself is a little bit of a modified Marin Sausalito E1, but the majority of the components, the battery, the motor, drivetrain, brakes, are all stock. So starting off with the motor, it's a Shimano E5000, which has 40 Newton meters of torque, which might not seem a lot compared to a lot of e-bikes on the market these days, but for my needs, I found it perfectly adequate. And it was pretty easy going up all the hills around Brisbane. So paired to the motor is a 418 watt-hour battery, which again, might not seem like a lot, but paired with a 40 Newton meter motor, I actually found that the battery life was pretty impressive. So leaving it in high the whole time, as I said, it's pretty hilly around Brisbane and I weigh around 90 kilos. I was able to get around about 65 kilometers out of the battery, which is pretty impressive on the highest level of assistance. And another thing I really liked about the bike as well is just the bulletproof, reliable Shimano Dior drivetrain. The gearing range is really good. I don't think you need kind of bigger than a 1x10 drivetrain on an e-bike. And because it's a 10-speed chain, it's a nice strong chain as well. Other than that, I really like the riding position on the bike. It's got a nice tall stack, so it's a really comfortable upright position. So overall, I've been really enjoying the time on the bike. I really like the natural feel that the 40 Newton meter motor has. I've been on other e-bikes where it's kind of a bit jarring feeling that instant torque kind of kick in, whereas this is definitely a little bit smoother. So if this is your first e-bike and you're looking to get into it, you might enjoy the more natural feel out of this bike. But if you just want to get somewhere as fast as possible, you're doing a lot of climbs and you're just doing a really long commute, probably the Sausalito E2 might be suited to your needs. But for me, someone who's doing 5 to 20 kilometers for their commute and just wants that little bit extra help, I think this bike's going to be a great option for you. And if you do like this bike, I would also definitely recommend checking out the Polygon Colosi lanes because it's very similar to this bike in every single way. So that wraps it up for today. I did do a little bit of a ride to get here to get these nice shots of the bike, but the next time you guys will see me, I'll be doing another commute to the city. So to make the commute this morning a little bit more exciting, I decided to wear my Fitbit, and then this way I'm going to be able to track how many calories I burn. Because when a lot of people think e-bike, they think that there's no exercise involved whatsoever, but I think even though it doesn't feel that hard, I still think you might burn a surprising amount of calories. So let's do the commute and see just how many calories I burn. So made it back home, and that's another 20 kilometers clocked up. But what I really want to talk about is how many calories I burnt. So on the trip there, so just 10 kilometers, that took 30 minutes and I burnt 300 calories. And my average heart rate was around 120, 125 beats per minute. And my highest heart rate was 150 beats per minute. So what does all this mean? Well, in practical terms, it really dismisses the myth that you don't get any exercise when you're riding an e-bike. And to me, it means that commuting via e-bike is probably one of the most time efficient, low impact ways to burn some extra calories throughout the day and get a bit of exercise in. And regardless of your fitness goals, whether it's to improve your mental health, lose a little bit of weight, or just build up a good baseline level of fitness, I think an e-bike is going to be a great option. And because a lot of people are time crunched these days, finding ways that you can burn calories without going out of your way to do it is definitely a great option. So commuting via e-bike is probably one of the best solutions for this. So there you go, you can still reach your fitness goals by riding an e-bike. So it's the final day now and I thought I'd treat myself during lunch, so I'm going to play a quick 9 holes of disc golf. And I normally wouldn't do this during lunch because it doesn't really make sense taking the car. It's only around 3 or 4 Ks. But for this kind of trip, I think the e-bike's perfect. So when I get back, I'll give you my final recap of the challenge and we'll really find out if the e-bike is worth it. So after 7 days, where does that leave us? And I have to say, I'm pretty stoked on the e-bike. And it couldn't have come a more perfect time for us because we recently downsized from having 2 cars to 1, and just having the e-bike to do those smaller trips just makes so much sense. Just doing those 3 to 4 kilometer trips in a car just feels so lazy to me, and it's also not the best thing for cars either, doing those cold starts and only really short trips. So that's where the e-bike has really come into its own in my lifestyle. The only problem I need to solve now is getting my wife to ride one as well, so then we can ride together. And another thing that I really liked about the e-bike is that if I wanted to, I could ride it every day. If I did that on my normal bike, my legs would be screaming at me. I think it's mainly because you're just not burning yourself up the hills and building up all that lactic acid. Just the next day you feel fresh and ready to go. But with all that subjective stuff aside, let's dig into a little bit about the data. So over the week I did 83.7 kilometers total. And in the car, if I was doing that, that's 18,414 grams of CO2 emitted. But on the e-bike, that's 2,092.5 grams. So such a significant reduction there. I think like 9 times less, which is really impressive. But one of the big things for a lot of people these days is gonna be the money. So in the car, this week would have cost me $13.39, but on the e-bike, it was only around $1.30. So again, significant improvement there on the e-bike. But there's other factors too. My mental health was definitely a lot better this week. Just being out, being active, I definitely felt a lot better in that sense. But also the calories burn as well. Throughout this whole week, I've burnt around 3,000 extra calories, which I normally wouldn't have. But there's one thing you really can't buy, and that's time. Well, I guess in this case, you could just buy an e-bike. But when I was comparing the commutes to my wife when she was catching the bus and the car, I would have saved around about 90 minutes, which again is absolutely huge when we're pretty time crunched these days. So this might not seem like a lot on a weekly scale, but when you extrapolate it over a year, it's pretty crazy. And I think it's safe to assume people would probably ride a little bit more than me if they're actually commuting normally to work. So I bumped it up to 100 kilometers instead of my 83, and extrapolate it over a year, that's 5,200 kilometers a year, which is gonna be $754 saved, which again, absolutely crazy. But the CO2 was what really impressed me there. You're gonna save around 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere, which again, super impressive. But the one that really impressed me was the calories. So over a year, you'd burn around 156,000 calories, which is absolutely insane. So with all that being said, finally get to the crux of it. Is it worth it? And for me personally, I think it definitely was. Because we sold a car and essentially replaced it with an e-bike. So in our situation, we've got the money that we used to the car, got an e-bike, so we've saved a bit there, and then we're saving even more money by using the e-bike instead of my normal car. But for someone who has 2 cars and then they're adding an e-bike, from our calculations, if we're saving around $750, it might take you 3 or 4 years until you recoup the cost from purchasing the e-bike. So that's something you're gonna have to consider if you're thinking about getting an e-bike. But overall, the experience has been great for me, so I definitely recommend checking one out. And if you have any questions about my experience, I'm super happy to answer anything that you have. And as always, thanks for watching. See ya.